Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram. Let me start by saying that this is a recorded program. We're recording on 18th of October and it will be shown as you're seeing on the screen now. Now, sometime May 5, 1838, a ship called Whitby arrived in what was then British Guyana on docking at Highbury on the east bank of the Berbice River, with 244 units of human cargo. From that time to April 18, 1917, with the arrival of the ship, the Ganges, indentureship, described by British historian Hugh Tinkle as a new form of slavery, by Walter Rodney as being of neo-slave nature, or by Chief Justice Charles Beaumont as a rotten, monstrous system rooted in slavery. Some 238,979 Indians were transported to British Guyana. They came under what the British capitalists and their lawyers conceived and described as an indenture agreement. Under this agreement, mostly illiterate men placed their thumbprint on a document that bound them to carry out back-breaking work in the cane fields of a far and distant land for a pittance of wages and a promise of return to India after 5 years. The year 1838 is, of course, of significance to another important group of Guyanese, the Africans who came as slaves to our country. In 1838, of course, marked the end of slavery, arguably the most prolonged, heinous, degrading, and inhuman people upon people acts in the history of the world. But back to the Indians, I am sharing with you this evening a recorded interview with Professor Dabydeen, himself a descendant of indentured laborers. Professor Dabydeen is a novelist, poet, academic, and diplomat, and for decades has been associated with the University of Warwick Center for Caribbean Studies. He was in Guyana recently to celebrate with another distinguished Indian Guyanese business leader, Yesu Prasad, the renaming of the University of Warwick Center for Caribbean Studies as the Yesu Prasad Center for Caribbean Studies. Professor Dabydeen, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
For agreeing to be on Plain Talk.
A pleasure. The last time we did a program together, it was when Naipaul won the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, that's correct. That's
in
correct.
2000, I think it was. 2001, maybe.
Quite a long. So this is overdue.
Yes.
Now, I want you to start by commenting on a matter outside of this.
Yes.
We're talking. Your name came up in the question of the shares sold by the government of Guyana
Yes.
to a Chinese investor,
Yes.
and some $5 million US
Yes.
had not been paid. There was some question whether you had negotiated away the $5 million
Yes.
or somebody had received the money
Yes.
and it wasn't properly accounted for. What's the story behind that $5 million?
Well, I was rather perplexed that there seemed to have been some confusion in Guyana over the $5 million, because contractually the $5 million is still owing, and the Chinese have been in negotiation with the government actually very, very recently, in fact yesterday and so on. So of course this is a matter of negotiation between the government and the Chinese company, and that has been going on for quite a while, and it's still ongoing.
And so
this is part of a normal part of international business. If we have a dispute with each other, we sit and negotiate, and that has been going on for quite a while. Yeah.
And your role, you were the ambassador to China.
Yes.
And it's in that capacity you got involved. How did you get involved?
Yeah. Well, my job in China was twofold. One was a cultural set of activities. So I was able to, say, for example, persuade the Chinese government to set up a Confucius Institute at the University of Guyana, and they paid for that, and they're still paying the budget. They renovated the language lab, and we have a few hundred young people studying Mandarin. So that was the rewarding part for me as an academic. And the other part was representing the government in its negotiations with Chinese companies and other enterprises which wanted to enter Guyana. So in 2010, the embassy received a request to find a potential investor for the government's sale of its 20% shares of GTNT. I think that letter went out to all the embassies. And I was introduced to a Chinese company through the Grenadian ambassador.
Yes.
As you know, the Caribbean ambassadors in China, we're a very small group. We help each other out. Mm-hmm. And so the negotiations start. When the government had offered, you know this more than I do, because you wrote a lovely article on GTNT, saying that because of the liberalization of the industry, competitors will come in, and therefore the monopoly over digital communications, data transmission, and even landlines may be lost, and therefore GTNT may lose revenue. And therefore it would be very difficult for the government to sell its shares, the 20% shares.
Certainly at that kind of price that was being bandied about, yes.
Well, the government put it out for tender in 2010 and received an offer of $7 million US. Before the government could put it out for tender, they approached ATN, the majority shareholder, the Americans, to offer the 20% shares. And ATN replied that they were not interested in 20% shares, but could the government buy their 80% shares?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
nobody wanted to buy the shares, it seems, yes? Or people were nervous about the potential, the unknown potentials of liberalization. Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm a professor of literature.
Yes, yes.
I'm not treading on your territory. But I found an investor, and I was asked to front the negotiations, and the investor started with an offer of $7 million. And then you negotiate, and you find a way, you kind of understand how the Chinese negotiate. The most important thing is trust. Mm-hmm. Very important. They will not talk to you about anything until they like you. Now, how do they get to trust you? You have to drink with them, and you have to smoke with them. So I had a lot of motai sessions and cigarette sessions, and you have to eat. In this case, the potential investor had a Japanese restaurant, so I ate a lot of raw fish. I ate a lot of raw fish on behalf of my country.
All that was a trust-building exercise.
Yeah, well, you meet twice a week, 3 times a week. You talk about everything in life, and then you talk about GTNT.
Then you move up the price.
Then you move up from 7. I moved it to 9. I moved it to 11. I moved it to 12. I moved it to 16, and the investor said, "No more, no more." Then you go again, and you eat some more fish. You drink some more butai. You move to 18. Now, being serious, because I've been doing this for the University of Warwick. I've been part of the fundraising team of the University of Warwick, apart from being an academic professor there, since 1984-85, yes? Mm-hmm. So this was nothing arduous, yes, or particularly challenging. It was just a matter of continuing
but they're tough
negotiation.
negotiators. Chinese are
very
tough
negotiators. And you have to know how to do it. You have to say, well, look, sir, on this table, this is copper, this is aluminium, this is bauxite, this is manganese, this is a golf course, this is a potential resort. If you're part of the game, maybe you could also invest in these sectors, yes? And then you also have to say, which you have to say, we are a developing country, and every dollar counts, see? Because a dollar is very important, maybe not be important to you, sir, but for us it's important. So, okay, it moved to 18. And then it was 18 plus the donation of 4G LTE equipment, latest communication technology. And the government said, no, not 18. And I remember moving it then to 20 and then 22, and then we got to 25. This is about after 8 or 9 months, yes, 25. And I thought we're getting to a reasonable figure here, yes?
That was probably very reasonable at that stage.
Well, I mean, considering we were offered $7 million when the government put it out to the Caribbean and to Guyana. But I thought 25, I could try for a little bit more. It doesn't hurt. So you drink some more mutai, you smoke some more cigarettes. By this time you're friends and you're drinking partners, and I really liked my people I was negotiating with. I liked their stories about their lives. I learned a lot about China. I had time to read Chinese classics like The Dream of Red Mansions. I read the poetry of Li Bai and Du Fu. So during the drinking, I could mention Du Fu and Li Bai, to show that I made an effort to understand
Yes, yeah.
the literary culture in my case, yes?
Mhm.
So it got to 25, and then it went to 26, and then, look, it got to 30, yes? It got to 30 million. And then I thought, this is good, but I could try for some more.
So you kept pushing.
Yes, of course, to the very end.
So they've
And it went to 35. It went to 35 million, and I knew I couldn't get another penny. I'd really exhausted all the...
So what caused the delay in paying this 5 million?
Well, the contract was very simple. Well, I should say, first of all, the two offers were made, and this is all public knowledge, 35 million in different installments, 4 installments I seem to remember, or 30 million in 2 installments, 25 million upon signing of the agreement,
Yeah.
and the 5 million within 2 years, yes?
Yes.
So that was done, and then when the 5 million, but then the company had, as you will read in the newspapers, they'd said that we were unable to fulfill all the obligations. This is their allegation.
I mean, Guyana did not.
This is their allegation.
Yes.
That they had or this was their case that we had not fulfilled certain promises.
Which is that they would get 2 seats on the board.
2 seats on the board, a veto
On capital expenditure.
on capital expenditure and debts, the company incurring debts,
Sure.
and also a veto on the company changing its constitution. Matters that you will understand more than I do, and so I was able to say to them that I understand your what your grievances are, but the contract is the contract, and the government did try with ATN to negotiate post signing of the contract, and so therefore we're discussing.
So there's no question of money having been received and not paid.
No,
is it?
well, they're here actually, as I said
Okay.
yesterday,
Well, we can go on.
to discuss the outstanding 5 million. They don't acknowledge that they owe the 5 million. All the parties acknowledge that 5 million is owing. So the negotiations are going on with this government, and I hope that they will eventually come to fruition. So therefore, things are in hand. Yes.
Okay.
With regard to NISIL and our government and the Chinese, yes.
Now, you would have seen a letter in today's papers, the 18th of October.
Yes.
Mr. Naurang Prasad, a very prominent Guyanese, who described the decision to erect a monument to Indian arrival in Palmyra, 12 miles from where the actual arrival took place. We said earlier that it took place at this was on Highbury. He described the decision to place the monument 12 miles from the actual place of arrival as illogical, arrogant, and an insult to the collective intelligence of Guyanese. Do you subscribe to that?
I've not read the article, and I don't know.
Trust my word.
Yeah, no, I don't trust your word. I won't use. We tend to use hyperboles when moderate.
You're a diplomat.
When
Professor.
moderate language would do. Why say disgraceful? There are many
No,
disgraceful.
illogical, arrogant, and an insult to the collective intelligence of
But
Guyanese.
insult. Why? I don't know.
But do you agree?
Look.
The sentiment, well, the facts. Let's forget the
A
sentiment.
monument, to my mind, a monument doesn't have to be in the exact spot where you first put your foot. I mean, ideally it is, yes, But
And if you have a chance, you should.
well, if there is an opportunity and the ground is solid and so on, and there's access to the space, then it may be. But there may be other reasons why a monument doesn't have to be. Trafalgar Square in England, there's a big monument to Nelson. Trafalgar is not in London; it was somewhere in France, right? A monument is a symbolic memory. It's a symbolic way of remembering an event or people. Yeah?
Sure.
So I personally don't bother with these minutiae. I think what's important is what does it look like and what does it say, the monument. What is the inscription, and is it aesthetically beautiful? Is it pleasing?
Yeah.
I am so I think my university, the University of Warwick, we were happy to be able to organize an international conference, bringing together 40 scholars from all the countries where indentured laborers landed. That's Fiji, Mauritius, South Africa, etc., Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname. We were able to bring all these scholars together to commemorate the centenary of the abolition of indentureship. Because we are scholars, so there are academic papers given of different qualities, obviously, which we will collect in 2 volumes, and we're also doing an anthology of creative writing from all over the world where indentured laborers were.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what we can do within our resources.
Okay, so
yes?
you see no problem with that. You don't share now episodes.
I don't not share it, or not do I not share it, or nor do I share it. I just don't know enough about the discussions around that.
Extremely diplomatic. Well
No,
done.
I'm not trying to be diplomatic. I'm trying to confess my ignorance of the details of the discussions, because I've not been party to them.
Now, this question of we had the waves of slaves brought to this country.
Yes.
Free people brought us slaves. They weren't
Yes.
slaves in
Yes.
their own country. They were
Yes.
brought here and they're enslaved.
Yes.
But we also had others. The Portuguese, they arrived in 1835, I
Yes.
think. On the intention, this is post
Yes.
emancipation. Chinese in 1850. These groups don't receive a lot of attention either in the public discussion, in academia. Why is that?
They are largely invisible. They're largely invisible for historic reasons. I can, for example, if I can tell you about slavery studies, yes, the study of enslaved Africans, pioneered by American scholars, and of course in America it is easier to access finance to do research, publications are easier, resources are available. So it's not malicious. It's just that you know what they say: if you have a theory, and to promote your theory, you need an army. A theory needs an army, right? And in this case, an army of scholars. Let me say that Warwick in October next year is organizing a 2-day international conference on Chinese in the Caribbean. And we will not just have it in Warwick, we will bring it to Guyana. Secondly, let me say the very, very, very first book published in the Warwick University Macmillan Caribbean Studies series was on the Amerindians in the Quarantine. The second book was about the Mohoran massacre in Trinidad, and so on and so forth. Right? I should also say, Christopher, that this year is really important because in 1787, this is another anniversary that coincides with the centenary of Indian indentureship, the ending of Indian indentureship. In 1787, 12 Christians, motivated by, I should say 12 disciples of Christ, motivated by high ethical principles, 8 Quakers and 4 Anglicans met in London to set up the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade. That's 1787. So our centenary, I say our as a descendant of Indian indentured laborers, and the centenary of and the anniversary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Committee are intimately entwined. Because as you know, if the slave trade had not been abolished and slavery abolished, we would not have been here.
That's right.
So our history is intimately entwined. But let me tell you another little story, which is almost unknown. Wilberforce was heading the campaign in Parliament to abolish the slave trade.
Yes.
When certain bills were presented to Parliament, they were voted down because the West Indian planters, the West India interest, had a lot of sway in Parliament.
Lord Gladstone and them.
Gladstone being one, but many others. Yeah? There are many, many others. Don't forget, there were hundreds of estates and plantation owners,
Yeah.
and they had control of Parliament. But in 1796, and we must remember this is a very important date, in 1796, Wilberforce was certain that his bill to abolish the slave trade would pass, because he'd galvanized enough supporters. In 1796.
96.
It wasn't passed because 4 or 5 of his main supporters went to an opera instead. There was an Italian opera called The Two Hunchbacks, a comic opera, which was very popular, and they went to the opera instead. And as Wilberforce wrote in his diary, you can imagine his disappointment.
Yeah.
They went to the opera.
It took another 34 years.
No, from 1796 to 1807, the slave trade I'm talking about.
Yeah.
700,000 Africans were enslaved because of that opera. Now, I've done some research in the opera. I found the libretto on the internet, and I would love to. Well, I have Italian students as well, and I hope to get it translated. And I would like to perform it in Guyana, telling the actors and actresses and the singers that we will be pelting you with rotten oranges, and we provide rotten oranges to the audience, right? But isn't that dreadful, right?
Amazing.
Anyway, the two anniversaries are reminders that our histories are mutual
And they
and
interlink.
intertwined. Yes, inextricably so.
Now, tell me something. When this looking back, is this a rehearsal, some sentimental attachment with the past that we now, David Dabydeen and Christopher Ram and present generation of Indians, know nothing about, don't really relate to and with?
Well, first of all, there is a difference between nostalgia and scholarship.
Yeah.
Scholarship is to put the record straight, to unearth and publish and promote knowledge about subjects that tend to that have been eclipsed or buried or neglected. Yes, so you're moving them from neglect to the high table, as it were, and that is for because the past informs the future. Yes, you know, if you don't have a sense of your past, really you don't have an identity and a sense of a future, and this is why we want to do. I mean, I'm excited, having come from China, to want to spend at least the next 5 years working on the Chinese in the Caribbean, as well as my other work, because that is extraordinary history that when uncovered will reveal another aspect of our multicultural, multiracial dimension. When I went to China, I visited the Museum of the Chinese Diaspora. I found a village where most of the Chinese came from, in Guangzhou. Guangdong province. I was very moved to be there. Yes?
Yeah.
This is where they all came in the 19th century. And then I went to visit the port in then called Amoy. I went to Xiamen, I went to Dalian province. I went to Xiamen in the south, which is where many people left, right?
Must have been very helpful to be both a diplomat and an academic at the same time.
It
because
does,
of the
yes.
access it gave you.
You can, yes. And also, don't forget I have Chinese family. My happiest year in my life in Guyana, I left when I was young, was staying in Hatfield Street with my auntie Rini and my uncle Albert, my cousin Alan Shin was the chairman of the Chinese Association here. He was a member of Parliament as well. And
Of
my
course,
cousins,
you were from Berbice.
from Berbice, but
You
I
came to Georgetown for your education.
I was at QC, so I boarded with my Chinese family.
Yeah.
And it was, food. You always think of food.
So this is not just about nostalgia.
Oh,
This,
no.
for academics, this is putting the records out there.
Well, this is exactly that. You're writing history,
Yeah.
But you can't ignore what went on in the past. Yeah, you don't use the past either as a shield or as a spear,
Excuse.
or no, as an aggressive tool against other people. I don't believe in any centricities, whether it's Afrocentricity or Indocentricity. If anything, I believe in eccentricity.
Most professors apparently practice that.
Well, we're close to the border. They say that well, not me as a genius, but there's a thin line between genius and madness, which sometimes we cross over and then we come back quietly, No, but seriously, it is important that those of us who are in a privileged position, to have access to the world's archives and the world's best libraries, that we push out the boat, as it were, the scholarly boat, yes?
Well, that brings me to this question, though, Professor. Why is it in Guyana? Now, Guyana had one of the largest number
Yes.
of indentured laborers coming out of India to any other country. You mentioned Mauritius, you mentioned Fiji, you mentioned Suriname, you mentioned Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, all those places had in Guyana is about the only significant country that has done practically nothing to mark this centenary event. In fact, Professor, had it not been for the collapse of that monument, which quite frankly was an
Yes,
embarrassment,
yes.
Guyanese might not even have noticed.
Notice
is-
what? Notice what?
That this is the year.
Right, okay.
Is this not a dereliction of duty by us as inheritors of the past? And the struggle and sacrifices those people made.
Well, first of all, let me say positively that Fiji, South Africa, Mauritius, Britain, and Montpellier University in Europe,
yeah.
we had international conferences to mark the centenary of the
What
abolition
is
of indentureship.
against the backdrop of those things that I'm asking about?
Well,
what we have not done.
I cannot speak for why. there
You're
was-
Guyanese.
No, I cannot speak. I am Guyanese. Obviously, of the diaspora. I cannot speak as to why there was such an awesome silence in Guyana about this issue. It may have been a lack of resources. It may have been. Look, let me not speculate. And I think you were wrong when you said that practically nothing was done. You were wrong. Nothing was done. Not practically nothing.
Well, David.
So it does surprise me, and it's not up to me to comment about the affairs in Guyana since I live abroad. But it did surprise me that we didn't have a.
Putting it to you as a Guyanese.
Yeah,
and
I wonder why we didn't have an event, because certainly in 1807, which was a very significant year, 1838, we always and Indian Arrival Day, we always remember, we always commemorate these occasions. Why not? Why not?
You raised another interesting question. Why are we commemorating that date when we were put into indentureship, into bondage?
Well-
we should be celebrating the freedom.
Yeah, well, which is abolition, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, which is no, but when you commemorate something, it doesn't mean you celebrate. Commemorate means you just
No, but
mark.
when you go on a holiday and this big fete and all that, that's
Oh, all right,
celebration,
okay.
David.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm calling you David.
No, by all means. Well, I mean, you certainly don't celebrate. You celebrate emancipation.
Yes,
You celebrate
absolutely.
abolition. Right?
Absolutely.
What do we celebrate?
We had this 175 years of arrival. I mean, when you think about it now and contrast that with the silence.
Well, you know, Christopher, as I do. Certainly, growing up in Guyana, we used every opportunity for a party. Yes, so it may be that there's a festive spirit in us, you know.
No,
that,
but a lot of
no, but
resources.
I think I don't want to say we should in a kind of Kantian moral way, but I think we should have commemorated in Guyana in a major way the centenary of the abolition of indentureship. It is a very critical aspect of our history. It may be lack of resources.
And as I said, but
It may be lack of
We could
resources.
have done it with the 175 years of arrival.
I
That's
agree.
the contrast I'm making, David.
It should have been done, you know.
And
But
it
then
was
it's
on
not
a
up
big
to me.
fanfare.
I'm doing what I'm doing where I'm living. I can't come and tell people here what to do, you know.
And
I
you
can
s-
make suggestions.
And you
but,
see, as I said, we were about the largest block.
yes, of course.
So
yes.
that surely puts the greatest
Well, I
greatest responsibility on us. I mean, I'm including myself.
Christopher, I cannot understand the silence.
Well, let me ask you
I
this.
really can't. If I were put on my diplomatic hat now, right? I may say lack of resources. I may say it rained a lot for the last 4 months. I may say the sea levels were rising. I may say there was an outbreak of violence.
You know,
with
excuses for everything.
Well,
is
no, diplomatic reasons not to try to explain that the silence may have been deafening because it may have had something, maybe motivated by negative emotions. I don't know, yes? I really honestly don't know. And therefore, I think it's best if you ask that question to the wider community in Guyana. But, you know, these things are never too late.
Well,
It's
that's
never too late.
Now,
to-
there's
to-
a relationship between this year, 2017, and
yes.
2020.
Yes,
Could you
of course.
explain that, please?
2020, on the 1st of January 2020,
Right.
was the date when all the contracts were terminated.
Good.
So the system of indentureship was terminated in 1917. but people who still have their contracts.
The last boat came in 1917.
1917, yeah.
Yes.
But then all the contracts were terminated, even if they were going on to 1921
Or 22, because these were 5-year contracts.
So they were all terminated on the 1st of January 1920. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was really free then, right?
Yeah.
And
even those people who had 2 years to run on their contracts.
contract ended. I'm not, as you know, I'm not a historian. I'm a cultural historian and a literary critic. But scholars will know more around the legality of that and how it impacted on the indentured labourers whose indenture were terminated. Yes, they may have been compensated. I just don't know. But there's time. We have 2018, 2019, 2020 to think about how we could mark these really important dates and moments. Yes. Mm-hmm. And yes, go on.
No, you carry on. Were you finished?
No, I was just saying. Next year is obviously every year is important. Next year is the 180th anniversary. 180th. Is it 180 years since the Indians arrived? 1838 and 1988.
Yeah.
180. It's also the 180th year of.
You can always find something.
Yeah. And it's also the 180th year of the of emancipation.
Yes.
Yes. Mm.
But now, you kindly, or your secretariat, shared some of the programs, and we see participating in some of these conferences. Clem Sicharan. These are a real heavyweight.
Yes, major scholars.
Amina Ghafoor, Gaitra,
yes.
Bahadur, your good self.
Yes.
What can we then expect? And if we wanted to do it, we listen, let's say we've made a mistake. How can we recover?
Well, let me tell you what the university will do, if it may serve as a model, yes?
Yes.
For the next 15 years, 15. For the next 15 years, the university is committed to having an annual lecture on Indian indentureship and its aftermath, yes? Mm-hmm. This lecture, which will be filmed and broadcast and be available on the internet, is also a counterpart to our major lecture, which is the Walter Rodney Memorial Lecture. Mm-hmm. So we have the Walter Rodney Memorial Lecture, and we have the lecture is named after Ghafoor, so Guyanese again. Mm-hmm. So it'll be called the annual Ghafoor Lecture on indentureship and its aftermath. For 15 years, publications will arise, obviously, and it will be available on the internet. So it is not just stuck at Warwick University. Yes. So if we made that, and it's not it's in terms of finance. You know, you can do these things. You're an accountant. You know, you can do things. If you have a will to do something,
yes,
you'll find the $2 or the guinea seed or whatever you need, right? You know, you can have a lecture, and these things don't cost much. What it
you
is
have
is
low
the will.
cost initiatives. You are splurging.
You have to do it. Yeah, you can manage. So for public education, it'd be wonderful if in my country, Guyana, we could have regular public lectures, and there are many public lectures already hosted by the University of Guyana and so on. I'm just saying, there's always need for more, isn't there? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is just need. Mm-hmm. I mean, I saw.
But let us not. I'm sure you're not. But let us not take away from the efforts being made by people in Guyana to do all kinds of historical research and so on. Yes?
Well, yeah, but I want to get to this. Look, so many countries have an Indian museum. I mean,
yes.
I remember talking to people about a Pukni and a Lora and Sil, and people don't even know what it. We should have a museum, David.
Yes. Well, have one. I mean, I'm going tomorrow to Trinidad, and my friends there have invited me to go. They've invited me to go to see the museum, and of course, and actually, if I may say, and I'm not being diplomatic, we should do this for everybody, all of us. Because a Pukne or a Belne would have echoes in the way other ethnic groups set that fire going. Yes.
Yeah.
And so therefore you can have kind of comparative understanding of who we are. No, of course. I campaigned, if I may say, very vigorously, and the Chinese were very sympathetic to the idea of a museum not an old-fashioned museum, interactive museum for young people, and museum and,
Where,
and
where
an art
you use
center.
digital and
Yeah.
stuff and so on.
But you could also have the artifacts, but
Yes,
not
yes.
just the artifacts, which are static. You can have photographs of people blowing the
Yes,
fire and
yeah,
so on, right?
yeah.
And the Chinese, I have to say, were very sympathetic to the idea of a brand new museum and arts center. And actually,
That's for the Chinese,
no, for us.
for Indians.
No, not for Indians, for Guyana, yes.
But,
And
do you
and
think
you-
we need to have an Indian museum?
I think yes, of course we do. Yes, of course we do. But I don't think it has to be exclusive. You know, yeah. I mean, a museum is.
Or at least a museum with different sections.
Well, my idea was to have a national museum, not to replace the old museum, but to make this one interactive and modern, built-in libraries, cafes, and so on, and an art gallery and exhibition space. So it will include all of our histories, yes, and it could be done in a.
But sometimes when
in a-
when you try to be too ambitious, you have problems. Here it is.
No.
A major event like this.
Yes.
Surely warrants specific
Yes.
focus.
I agree. I agree that in Guyana, where resources are limited, then you could have a smaller activity and a smaller structure. Don't forget, I'm in China. They deal in $500 million is like nothing. Well, I don't say it's like nothing. They deal in fairy tale money, yeah?
They're still very savvy.
So
when it comes
when
to-
I went to meet the Chinese, who were very gracious, the foreign aid people, very gracious to me. They said to me, go and look at so-and-so if you want to have a Chinese feature to it. The University of Guyana was excellent. The architect here came up with a design, yes? You know, an initial design.
Yeah.
And things were in a really advanced stage of discussions. And unfortunately, everything was suspended because, you know, election year, everything is suspended, you know? But I still like that vision. And if it's Chinese funded, you know, the Chinese are very generous in monumental buildings. Look at Trinidad. They have the most beautiful, and look at Barbados, beautiful.
But you know who I think
structures,
should,
yeah?
you know who I think should fund this thing?
Who?
The British.
Yes.
And I want to ask you your thoughts on reparations for Indians. The British and the Indian government. Why can't they? Why should we go to the
Yes.
Chinese for this?
Because the British don't really have any money anymore.
But they have an obligation. Do they have obligations?
Of course, there is always an obligation. But don't forget the British. I don't want to defend Britain in any way, but I should say the British always bat for us in Europe, yes, or nearly always bat for us in Europe, right?
But we want them to accept their own responsibility for what they did.
Well,
to-
then let us put a project up. I mean, it's a simple matter. I evolved the project and gave it to the Chinese. Why? Because my first president was Chinese. You know, so I also could, legitimately ask the Chinese for support.
Do you believe there's a case for reparation for Indians?
That case has been, that case has now been made by my colleague and friend, who is the vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies.
That's
so Hilary Beckles, yes, who is the leading proponent for reparations. I have a little qualification about reparations, which is sometimes it looks as if we're always holding our hand out, you know?
Yeah.
You know, except if we define reparations in terms of educational facilities, building up in the University of Guyana, structures that are not about money.
But that's
yeah.
when it becomes a little bit as though you're asking for a donation. Why not say, look, you had this 238,979 Indians in this
Yes,
country,
yes.
apart from those who
Yes.
died
Yes.
on the ship as it crossed the
Of course,
Kalapani.
yes, yes,
You're responsible. You pay them next to nothing
yes,
wages.
yes,
You killed several people, including women,
yes,
in the pursuit of their struggle for justice.
yes.
You underdeveloped us, as Walter Rodney, you know, the famous term.
Mhm.
You've underdeveloped us, and we're suffering.
Well, I think of course there's a case for reparations, yes? There is a case for reparations. I'm just saying how you define what you will do with the with
Yes,
any
how you
reparations.
use it,
It's very
yes.
important,
Yes.
right? That's really very important. And there's need for reparation for the whole country.
Yes.
Don't forget the decimation of the Amerindians.
That's correct. That's correct.
The Indians, the Africans. So I always think it's always stronger when you do a joint approach to reparation. And I'm sure discussion. Well, I know that this in Guyana we have a reparations committee, which is I think partly advised or led by my old school friend Eric Phillips, right? And then I know in the Caribbean there's a sort of big reparation committees. One of the problems with the reparation, as Sir Hilary told me, was that when they had the big conference, the African countries did not want to pay reparations. Because, as you know, at any one time there were more slaves in Africa than there were in the transatlantic.
Yes.
Obviously, different quality of slavery. There are different forms of slavery.
Yeah, the Arab world.
And so therefore, we have to find a way of saying to the African countries, you don't have to pay reparations. You are also part of the victimization
Yes.
and the underdevelopment, as Rodney said, yes? So these are ongoing and complex issues that we have to think through, structure, and then decide whether we want to go forward. I certainly know that because £20 million were given in 1838 to Sir John Gladstone and others,
Absolutely.
which is today's money, billions of
Yes,
dollars,
yes.
I wrote to Sir John Gladstone's great-great-great-great-grandson, yes, to ask for to meet, yes, and he replied very generously and invited me to tea to the Gladstone archive in Harden Castle in Wales, and I replied, and we've been in communication, and then he invited me to a lecture, and so there was some kind of reparation going on there on paper. And I was in a very privileged position to be able to write to Sir John Gladstone's great-great-great-grandfather. Unfortunately, then I went to China, so I have to now that I'm back, I have to resurrect that contact, yes?
In much of the literature, one gets a sense that women,
Yes.
the women who came across, often in much smaller numbers, they were the victims of violence, violence from their spouses, from their own community,
Yes.
victim of sexual violence
Yes.
from the overseers and the
Yes, of
managers.
course, yes.
Do you think, and you are a man of letters, outstanding man of letters, Guyana Prize winner, several books to your credit. Do you think, and you know, one must recognize Gayatri Bahadur and her
Oh,
book.
yes. Oh, brilliant. Wonderful.
That's a fantastic book. That must have been.
Let me tell
such
you about
scholarship.
that book. When I
Before we get there, I
Go
want to
ahead.
ask the question. Do you think we have done sufficient justice to recognize and extol the virtues of the Indian women
No.
who came across?
And I can tell you as a scholar, I'm not talking about in society, but in terms of scholarship, most of the scholarship on Indo-Caribbean history is male-centered, yes?
Yes.
The Warwick Conference last week was the first time 80% of the scholars were women. And there was a woman-centered philosophy behind the conference, because my co-conveners were powerful women academics, yes? That helped a lot. No, but that is being now remedied slowly. In terms of scholarship, in terms of understanding who the women were on the boats, why they came, what part of India they came from, what they did when they were here, and so on. It's largely invisible history, which now has to be brought to light. But there's another really important thing, very important, that must be brought to light. As Professor Sen, the Nobel laureate
Yes.
for economics, wrote with regard to other Indian scholars, they showed that all the famines in the 19th century, which drove us from India, every time there was a famine, there was a spike in indentureship.
Yes.
Every time there was a famine. All the famines were not because of food shortages, but because of British
because
mismanagement.
you're Prime Minister.
Because of British mismanagement.
Not just mismanagement,
Hold
the
on.
cruelty of the British.
No, I'm going on to that. British mismanagement of the agricultural economy of India. Secondly, even at the height of the Orissa famine, hundreds of thousands of tons of wheat were sent to England.
That's correct.
So they were eating Indian bread. And thirdly, millions of acres, rich acreage of India, which can be used for agricultural products, food, was used to grow poppy to make opium to sell to the Chinese in return for tea. So let the Indians starve. Basically starve them and ship them out.
Did Churchill say something
No,
close to that?
that's the Bengal famine. In the second, yes, he said yes.
Did he actually say that?
Yes, something. It's a Malthusian idea that let them starve. Nature is balancing itself out.
That's
Something
cruel,
like that.
man.
I mean, it's a 19th century philosophy that had a great deal of power in England.
Yeah, Malthus.
Malthus, yeah. Anyway, we must remember that we were starved and shipped. So the suffering of women started. Why do you have pandits and religious leaders go on that boat?
Yeah.
In their own societies, they would have a lot of elevation and status. No, they were hungry like everybody else, right? Because of mismanagement of the Indian economy and the export of food to Britain when the food could have been eaten in India. There are other reasons why people came. Some of them wanted an adventure. Some of them
were lured to coming in.
Some of them were lured. Some of them wanted to escape moneylenders and maybe cultural practices in India, which they found unpleasant, But by and large, the people were hungry. You don't leave your country, cross the Kalapani, lose your caste and your caste affiliation.
But they were told. They were misled. For example, when they were told that they were going to Suriname, it was made to something like as though they were going to some Ram territory.
Yeah, of course. No doubt there was some.
That is gross misrepresentation in law.
No doubt there was some of that was deception, but I would think that a lot of the people who came were desperate because of mismanagement of their country by the Raj. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So starve them and
the
ship
Raj
them out.
meaning the British.
The British,
yes.
The British, yeah.
People think of Raj as an Indian.
No,
word.
the Raj is the. Even when the British colonial authorities set up relief camps, do you know that the overwhelming amount of Indians in the relief camps died? Yeah. All the information is there for. This is where scholarship is important, right? So I like the idea that we must always remember we were starved and shipped, right? And so therefore, when there is a calculus as to who suffered most, we have a brilliant historian in Britain who talked about the MOST syndrome, M-O-S-T syndrome.
Mm-hmm. It's an acronym. He uses it
yes,
as an acronym.
The most oppressed people ever, the MOPE syndrome,
MOPE,
M-O-P, the most oppressed people ever. I suffered more than you.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. And look, we suffered.
That's an idle talk.
You suffered in psychological ways. You suffered in physical ways. You suffered in all kinds of ways, in philosophical ways, your manacles. Look, acknowledge our suffering, but let us not wallow in it. Obviously, and then we move forward and survive and triumph. Yes?
As I said, slavery must be the worst human on human, because slavery was a lifetime. Indentureship had a fixed period.
Absolutely, and it lasted for. It's a kind of African Holocaust. Yes.
Yes.
And it had and still has impact on the contemporary world and contemporary Africa. Walter Rodney's brilliant how Europe underdeveloped Africa.
Well,
yes.
How would that? Let me ask you this question, and probably your answer will be influenced by what you just said. I was going to ask you. You're an internationally known, acclaimed novelist, academic. You would have made many visits to India. I take it. I am sure, whilst you're in that country, your thoughts, your imagination, your curiosity would cause you to wonder, what if my foreparents did not go to Guyana? How do you think it would have, what impact do you think that might have had? Do you think that you would have been better off, worse off? Or it's just an academic
It really is speculative because in some ways, what we can talk about in the journey, at the end of the journey, and when we survived the journey, and by we I mean all Guyanese, we triumphed, right? Mm-hmm. We beat everybody at cricket. We have scholars all over the world. By and large, we're a stable society here. And if you think there's ethnic tensions, go to South Sudan or go to Sri Lanka, right? you know,
Or India.
or India,
You have
or
a,
the Muslim and Hindu,
Yes,
and,
yes.
and so we have to sense our strength and sense that we are in a lucky situation, which was inadvertent. We made it lucky, you know.
serendipity.
We dug the canals by shuffle, right?
No, in terms of getting here, it was.
Well,
We didn't know what we were coming to.
absolutely. But what I'm saying is, once we got here and we gained our freedom, or we took our own freedom, and we started to build our society. Comparatively, we've done well. You know, I don't mean well in terms of spectacular economic progress and so on, but when you think where we came from, you know, we've got to say we've done well in terms of how we manage religious differences, how we manage ethnic differences. I'm not being optimistic and roseate in my vision, but I do go to countries where I see desperate poverty and desperate violence, you know, ethnic violence, yes? And by and large, we have managed not to engage frequently in that kind of activity, yes? Mm?
Now, India has made valiant efforts and attempts
Yes.
to link its diaspora with back home. Do you get the impression that they think of Guyanese when they do that, or is it these techno-savvy and these multi-millionaires in Silicon Valley and those places
Well,
that they think?
yeah.
Do they really think much of us?
I think they do, but obviously, if they're looking for inward investment, then you go to Silicon Valley rather than Georgetown. Yes, so you have to be. If you're to be pragmatic, you can see that they also have limited human resources. So therefore, they'll have to target those towards where they are very wealthy
What
and
do you
very
mean,
powerful Indians.
1.3 billion unlimited resources, human resources?
Well, no, 1.2 billion people divided by you're the accountant. It comes to 5 cents, right? Or 50 cents or whatever. No, I mean limited human resources in the Ministry for Overseas Indians.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
Okay, yes, yeah.
And they've only been going for about 15 years, so it takes time. And of course they do, because we have an ambassador here who, and I remember when I used to come to Guyana a few years earlier, there were cultural activities and there dance groups and so on. Yes, so obviously Guyana is you've got to remember as well, you know, we are a small country in a huge world, right?
Yes.
You know, the trouble I get sometimes, I go to the post office and I put Guyana. They sent my letter once to South Africa, right? Then
Sometimes it goes to Ghana.
I don't know. Well, there was completely lost. But I remember going to a travel agent in England to book my ticket to Guyana, and she couldn't find it, right? You know, so we have to realize that we are a small country. Our economy is like 2 medium-sized British industries or American industries. And so therefore, other countries will take into account our size and our resources when they deal with us, yes? Geopolitically, that's a different matter. We're very important. And so that gives us a certain strength in the United Nations system.
2 quick questions as I'm looking at the clock.
Yes.
I remember I was a young boy at the time when the last ship, because we had a neighbor.
1955.
Yes.
The Resurgent.
Yes,
was it?
MV Resurgent. Yes, my father was working at Sproston's.
Was
We
he?
went out in a tugboat.
God, really?
And we saw the boat. But in Alexandrovich, we actually had a neighbor,
Yes.
Auntie Ahelia, we
Yes,
called her,
right.
and they were going mad. Have we cut our navel strings in, you know? Either independence, either
Yes.
the
Yes.
full
Well,
emancipation.
Unlike Trinidad, which has a large, stable middle class, in other words, people with money and access to education, libraries, and so on, and who go regularly to India,
Yeah.
physically, yes. Our people...
Tours and so on are
regularly.
yes.
And in Trinidad, there's 15 radio stations that do Indian music, television stations. They have the resources, yes, that we don't seem to have, or we don't have, yes. And so therefore, I think the naval string has been cut not because of apathy or anything, but because we can't afford to go to India, you know. But second, don't forget, India is alive in so many other ways, in the jandis, the flags, the way you eat, the way your parsad, your roti and your curry, you know. Brinsley Samaru did a brilliant lecture at Warwick on what the Indians brought in terms of plants and fruit and so on, right? So the memories of India are here, and the practices of India are here. And I drive around Georgetown, I see the temples,
But
the
as
mosques.
our own now.
I see the mosques, yeah.
But these are because some of the things. What surprises me, some Indians tell us some of the practices we have they've discontinued.
Yes, of
Have
course.
You heard
I
that?
mean, yeah,
We've held on to these things.
yeah, so it's been kept in amber. It's been kept in amber, you know.
We
Some of it, anyway.
We
yes,
mustn't make even as we seek to we have to end the program. We mustn't make it sound like if it's all milk and honey. I mean the logis, and again I'm old enough to remember
Yeah.
the logi at Peter's Hall and the logi Alexander Village, Rhineville. The
Christopher,
alcoholism.
Christopher, the poorest people in Guyana are the rural, the agricultural poor. That's where you go to the villages where I grew up, and they're serious poor, right? My grandfather never had a cent. There was no thing called money in the
Yes.
house, right? You know,
You go and catch fish and
you catch and you exchange fish for this and that and whatever, right? It was barter. There was no money, and there was no electricity. Electricity? What is electricity? Television? You're joking, right? So yes, I agree completely that that we have great pockets of poverty. Yes.
And we have some serious problems as well,
Oh, you mean drinking
Alcohol-
rum and so on?
Yes,
Yeah.
domestic violence. Those,
Yes, yes, yeah.
To
yeah.
what extent are those parts of what we suffered as we came out of indentureship?
You'd really need a tremendous psychologist and psychiatrist to answer that.
Well, I'm going to ask you the
Is
next
it
time.
drinking rum? Did we drink rum because we were traumatized by indentureship? Or
If you read Quarantine Thunder,
yes,
yeah,
the closer, yes. Okay,
that's a
yeah,
brilliant
yes,
book, isn't it?
It is,
But
yes.
but knocking drum and drinking the rum after coming from the game field and so on.
Yeah, I suppose you're talking now of excessive drinking.
Yes, yes.
Right, okay. So anything in excess, obviously.
But we've suffered from that, haven't we? Because
I should imagine that many of us have gone mad. A lot of wife murders, murders under influence of alcohol. But you know, Christopher.
and the fact that there was such competition for women.
Oh, you mean going back to the time?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
definitely. You see, if there's only 2 women and 50 men, which is the sex ratio imbalance was very,
Yeah.
very disgraceful. Really.
Initially, it was as bad as that almost.
And,
Yes.
yes. So if if a woman just watches another man, that obviously, those were reasons why wife beating became. Those were the colonial experience exacerbated wife beating.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it didn't happen in India, because I don't know. I've not studied it. But no, I come back to your point, the invisibility of women in scholarship, in terms of being known by scholars, that has to be addressed, yes?
Professor David Dabydeen, thank you so much for sharing this hour, finding some time. I know you're rushing back to the UK, but for finding some time to speak with me on Plain Talk. I'm sure our viewers will have benefited from this very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Christopher.
Personally, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Operator and viewers, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.